Hey y'all. Y'all are probably like, what is she doing in her robe? Listen, I am currently in a staycation. Okay, so I didn't actually leave the house, but I am stepping away momentarily from work. And it feels so good, and so needed. But while I'm doing that, I have the opportunity now to rewatch these episodes, and I get to experience them again, but this time as a listener. And so, as I was doing that, I was like, you know what? It might be cool if I add a little bit of extra of the now to some of these. And so, we dove headfirst into this series, right? And we started off just talking about the eyes of relationships, right? And how important and crucial it is to really do that me work, right? Then we talked about the number one relationship, right? And that's the one with God, and about how sometimes, which to me is a man-made construct, how sometimes religion can tarnish and dilute the way that we see God, when in all reality, all he wants is a relationship, which in turn was the key for me. Really diving headfirst into that relationship was the key, and like it ricocheted into all of my other areas in my relationships. And so super excited to dig deeper and deeper into this series. And so this next episode is entitled Family Matters, and we get to sit down with psychotherapists and a podcast host. Shout out to all the amazing podcasts, but the host of A Date with Darkness podcast, Dr. Natalie Jones, who just, wow, like just looking at this conversation, she blew me away, right? And you're probably like, Tania, why do we start with family, right? And so I know when we think of relationships, we automatically go to romantic relationships. But again, I'm a researcher by nature. So in preparing for this series, the more research I kind of walked into or stumbled into revealed this idea that our very first family, right? And so whether that be how you show up as a friend, how you show up as a romantic partner, how you show up as a boss or as a leader, right, is all heavily influenced by your first relational dynamic, which is your family, right? Your parents, your guardians, your siblings, and people who are in your household with you growing up, and right. And so I think anybody, especially like where I am, well, I still am. I was then, I am now, in this space of unlearning toxic behaviors and really doing that me work. Sometimes that involves taking a step back and reflecting on your past, and sometimes that is really seeking, not only seeking, but understanding and breaking down the truths about how you were raised. And in some cases, that's addressing childhood trauma, whether that was trauma that everyone knew about, trauma that you hid, trauma that has been revealed and you're healing from it, or whether it's unresolved trauma, right? But we would be lying if we said that family relationships weren't one of the most important, but also the first encounters that we have a relationship. And talk to Dr. Natalie was just so eye-opening, but also I cannot wait to share that with you. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and tap into episode 3. And before y'all go, if you like it, just do me a huge favor, okay? I love y'all to death. Don't ask y'all for too much. But if you're feeling the episode, if Dr. Natalie or I say something that you absolutely love, go ahead and push not only the like button, right, that thumbs up that lets us know that we're on the right track, but also subscribe for me. That way, as we're dropping more episodes and more videos, that you're getting access to that content. Like this episode we're about to get into right now. Episode 3, Family Matters. Let's go. What up, what up, what up? It is your girl, Tania, aka the Cool Auntie, and this is the Cool Auntie podcast. We're talking about a serious subject, but I'm smiling because the person y'all don't understand. I'm just my heart is so full right now. I got to give her flowers off air, but I have to start by giving her flowers on air because I want you to know, I think it's so important that people understand that what they're doing has purpose and meaning. I was at a very low point in my life, just recovering from my own relationship trauma. And when I tell you, I don't know how, I always say it's God, right? I don't know how I found you or how you found me, but you truly, truly, truly helped me and supported me in my healing journey. And so, Dr. Jones, thank you so much for your impact, but thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so happy to hear that the work that I've done on social media and otherwise has helped you and perhaps some of your listeners. So I really do appreciate that. It always helps. It's always a blessing to hear that it does help and that people really resonate with it and take it to heart and use that in their healing, which is exactly the intent behind it.
Absolutely. And I think it's great, even a platform for you all, because I think, especially in the Black community, this idea of therapy and mental health, as someone who's now in therapy and has been in for a while, I had my doubts as well. But I think you all really embracing social media and us seeing the realness of it behind the scenes, I think it's made folks a lot more comfortable talking about some of these things too. For sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. We've come a long way. We've still
Absolutely. And you know what, though? I love that you said that because even in therapy that I'm in now, I thought going into it would be a couple of weeks, a couple of sessions, like, okay, doc, here's my issue. Let's fix it and then move on. Like I was ready to, I'm like, oh, it's 3 months. She's like, no, that's not how this goes. But just in talking to her, and it started off with one issue. And I learned just through constant conversation how deep some of the issues and thoughts and things that seem so surface level, how deep they were. And as I mentioned to you before we hopped on the air, I didn't realize how much of my childhood interactions and childhood trauma is to this day still showing up in my personality and my everyday. Is that common for you when you're dealing with clients?
Absolutely. It is very common that people, first of all, it kind of takes them a while to even figure out that it's trauma. They just know that, they want their relationship to be fixed. They're feeling anxiety. They're feeling a little depressed. They can't communicate with their partner and they just want things to be fixed. It's not working. They don't know why, or they want their partner to be fixed. And so they don't really have the words to really understand the depth of what's happening. It's, even when they get there, it could be a tricky thing because, even when people know that, or they have that sort of inkling, or that's been shared with them, they're just not ready to receive it.
Because it's so nuanced, right? Because sometimes, like, when you care about someone and you love someone, you also give them the power to hurt you. And so it's hard to, like, even for myself, my inner critic, I had to own that some of my teachers and my parents and so many people who I cared about over the years had such a heavy impact and influence on my inner critic. It was really hard to own and to hold them accountable for their actions. Why do you think that is? Or is it because of the love?
There's messages about love, and what I will say about Black people traditionally, Black women, we don't have a lot of positive images of love. When it comes to books, when it comes to media, TV, even when it comes down to the music that you listen to, we had a blip of it back in the 90s, but now it's kind of gone. But, when you think about Black love that you see on TV and that you really, who do you identify with? What couple, what family is your relationship role model. Who do you want to be like? There's some of us that are very fortunate that have very good grandparents,
Right.
mentors, or church members or extended family members. But there's a lot of fractured Black families, especially since the crack epidemic hit in
Yes.
the 80s. There's been that did the most devastation to the Black family. And so, again, you have people that just, they have crumbs of
Mm.
what love is, or they have, they grew up in a community that normalized certain things, or they just didn't have those images
Right.
to see, or those role models to see. And keep in mind, um, your parents or whoever raises you are usually your first role models, the
Mm.
people that you idolize or that you look up to or that you model what relationships are like, whether that be good, bad, ugly, great, whatever the case may be. A lot of times we repeat what we see,
Mm.
or been modeled for us, even if in the back of our mind we have the wherewithal to know that, hey, that's not healthy and I don't want to be like that. But it's something about that generational pattern that's just kind of been laid down and normalized, and you know how to do that. Your brain is wired for that. Your brain is
Mm.
filtering for that. And there's something to be said for trauma bonding when your brain is sort of wired for bonding or being attracted to trauma and chaos.
It's crazy that you say that. Or not even crazy because it all makes sense. I think about,
Yeah.
um, I was listening to another podcast. I try not to consume too many podcasts. When you're a content creator, you try to
Oh
produce
yeah.
way more than you consume.
Yeah.
But I couldn't help but I hear a clip, and he said, the common denominator in all of your relationships are you. And I think about I'll say I'll be 28 tomorrow. And in my last three relationships, the ones I consider the most serious, they were all abusive. Not all
Mm.
physically, but
Mm.
mentally and emotionally and
Yeah.
physically at one point, all
Yeah.
abusive. And while it's easy to play victim, there was a role that I played in. And mind you, my mother was a victim of abuse as
Mm-hmm.
well that I saw. And it's crazy because you tell yourself, I'm not going to be that person. I'm not
Yes.
going to do those
Yes.
things. But then somehow you end up in situations where you're like, crap, I am that person and I am doing
Mm-hmm.
those things.
Mm-hmm.
Is that common? Is it common to know better and still not do better?
It is very common. And, I don't know that I subscribe to the common denominator in your relationships is you. Of course it's you. It's your relationship.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, so I feel like that's just kind of almost kind of like a blame game per se. You are the reason. While I think that there's some responsibility, scientifically there's reasons, biologically there's reasons. There has been a significant amount of research, done on, children who grow up in trauma infested environments. And, without getting too technical about it, your brain chemistry of a child or the brain functionality of a child when they grow up in a trauma filled environment looks very much like
Hmm.
the effects of that is the profoundly similar.
Hmm.
And we all know, I don't know if you know of anybody who's come back from tours of duty, from,
PTSD.
yeah. And so you know how hard it is for them, when they've been programmed to kill, they've been programmed to protect, they've been programmed to shoot weapons of mass destruction. And so when they come back or they try to assimilate back to normal life, it's like, what the hell is this? Any little noise, any little just something could be a trigger. And I
Yeah.
think, that's the same here, that the hard wiring is already laid down,
Hmm.
and so, I tell people that you have, when they come to see me in therapy or when people talk to me or whatever, you have 35, 40 years or how many ever years that you grew up in an environment or you were exposed to that parent. You have that many years of hard wiring that has been laid down. To know that, to undo that, to reprogram yourself, to retrain your brain to filter for good stuff, because you're retraining your brain at this point. You are chemically, neurologically retraining your brain to see the good in people, the good in situations, to not go back to someone that is extremely toxic or abusive. And so that does take work. But I think it's not just, a lot of people traditionally back in the day have, they were like, oh, if you're in an abusive relationship, you must like it, or you want you a bad boy. You don't want a man unless they beat on you, or something like that. And I'm not, I know I'm talking in heteronormative terms, but this applies to everybody. So I want to make that clear just for simplicity of conversation. And so I think it's not that simple as, oh, I like it, or your brain is wired for that. Your brain is trained to filter for that because that is what you've been exposed to. Now, if you have been exposed to, happiness, good times, and love, and you were educated on that, and your brain is going to filter for that. So people at the other end of the spectrum can't understand what a person that has gone through extensive trauma has gone through if they haven't gone through that. And I feel like everybody has some sort of trauma of some kind, but some are way more extensive or intense than others. Yeah. And so if you haven't really been exposed to that, you really can't really understand that. You can empathize with it, right? But you can't know what it's like until you walk in those shoes.
Absolutely. But you even bring up a great point of, I know when we use that word trauma, which I know is becoming a lot more culturally acceptable, but I think even like when people think trauma, they automatically go to abuse. But I know even in my own therapy, I learned that, I went through an abandonment with my father. And so being attracted to men who don't like me was very common for a long time. I never understood it because I would have really great guys who loved me. I'm just like, I don't like you. But then the guy who paid me no mind, I loved him. And then it took, therapy to realize, Tania, you're because of your abandonment, you were used to have to earning and working for love. And so I think we talk about trauma, people don't realize that it's also built into culture and what we're attracted to as well.
It is built into culture, is built into, a lot of it is narrative work. A lot of times I work with my clients around narratives that they tell themselves, or stories that their brain is running based off of their experience. It's kind of like what you said, your dad abandoned you. And so, that translated into the closest man in my life didn't really care for me and didn't like me or didn't want me. And when we have that narrative, a lot of times what we do is that narrative runs on repeat. And so we'll play out that narrative with someone who has very similar features. Neurochemically, your brain is seeking it out. You can't put your finger on it, and this person could seem like a knight in shining armor when you meet him, but you seek it out, and then you find out, okay, this is a pattern that's familiar with me, and I want this person to like me. I want to change the narrative that men don't like me. Meanwhile, there's the other side of the programming in your brain when you tell yourself that narrative, right? After you kind of go through that chaotic mess with that man that didn't like you and treated you like garbage. Oh, all men are garbage. All men are unavailable. All men play games. That's again, that continues to foster the narrative of rejection and explains why we feel so rejected. There's a billion, several billion, how many ever billion men on the planet, right?
Yeah.
Every single man on the planet is not going to reject you. In fact, the odds are more likely in your favor.
Oh, good.
But they're in your favor. You train your brain, and part of doing that work is learning how to talk to a man. It's learning how to connect with a man. And I'm saying that again, heteronormative, but just speaking in those terms, if the man in your life, the patriarch in your life wasn't there, and you didn't have like very good uncles or, father-like figures in your life, you really have to be specific, or that, your parents have to be really, specific about incorporating those men in your life so that you can have those conversations. You can be mentored, you can be protected. You can be provided for, or you can have conversations. You can have platonic male friendships without feeling like you have to be in a relationship with a man for sex. And so those are the things that you have to do. And what many women are finding, especially Black women, because I feel like for Black women, there's an extra layer. There's what we go through. There's a systemic oppression, and there's just the societal oppression as well. Like, you deal with the oppression at your job, and you deal with the society, and so Black women are the least protected. And so there's a lot of undertonings, with the messages towards Black women in general. So if we're not careful, we can feel rejected every place we go. And I think that's important. Like, we can feel rejected at work. We can feel rejected in the magazines and on the media. Drake and Lil Wayne are calling women bitches. You know what I mean? You're bitches, or you're good for sex. Other than that, we ain't got no use for you. No, you can't get my money, and no, you can't get my time. And there's 10 of you in line behind you. And so, we have these people, and then there's colorism, there's, body size, featureism, and all those other little things too that tell us that we're not good enough the way that we are. We're not beautiful the way we are. And so we take all that, stuff and mishmash and put it in our mind. And that really drives how we just move in this world and how we see this world.
But I love that you talk about just like there's so many layers. So we talk about unpacking and unlearning. I don't think, even for myself, again, going back to me thinking that therapy was just to be a couple of sessions, a couple of months of, like you said, you're having to unwire and to unpack years, double digit years of hardwiring. What does unlearning look like, especially again, with family? I know even for myself, even as I was unlearning, the hardest part was setting the boundaries, right? It's like you're trying to be a new person, but then if other people around you aren't helping you be a new person, so that can be a challenge. What does that look like? Or what have you seen it look like?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think you kind of speak to what a lot of people who come to see me speak to. Black women, Black people in general, wait till things get bad before they go to therapy. And by bad, I mean things are bottom out. The shit has hit the fan. Everything is just bad.
Yes.
Like there's no way, there's like no light at the end of the tunnel, right? We wait, we try to persevere, and we wait and let things get bad. And so one of the first things that I work with my clients on is feeling better. And a lot of times they just talk and kind of get that stuff out, and we problem solve in this crisis mode, right? We're trying to handle in the first session, right? Because they've thought that they could handle it. And then all of, this is years worth of stuff they put off therapy because they thought they could manage. And so we work on just feeling better in the moment, and normalizing, where you're at and what you're going through. The second thing is the awareness. awareness of what's going on, putting a name to the feelings, putting a name to the actions, both your actions, what's
Yes.
causing you to feel that way, and just allowing that to sort of bubble up to the surface. And awareness sometimes can take the longest time, because there's a fair amount of denial work that we might have to work through for people in order to see what's really going on. And so we do the awareness, and a lot of times, just kind of holding the client in session, and meaning just holding space for them to process that. And then also, thirdly, empowerment. Or what I will say, I feel like there can be a tie or prioritizing between education and empowerment. Sometimes for people are able to receive education because things have gotten so bad and they just
Right.
feel so low and so less of a human, that empowerment has to come first. And that means, telling that person that they are able and that they are capable, and know that they did not deserve that.
Right.
And then educating them about abuse or trauma, or, whatever the case may be, and just, kind of holding up the mirror for them.
Yes.
And then we can move to the interventions.
No, definitely. Definitely, definitely.
Interventions can be boundary work. Interventions can be communication work. Interventions can be and so it's going to look different for everyone. It's going to be different. Interventions could be practicing self-love, and building self-esteem. Those kind of interventions it would also be necessary.
Yes. I mean, I think I want to go back to your point. I mean, well, all of it, because number one, I do agree that awareness is probably that has to come before everything else, because even to your
Yes.
point, and I would vote for education first, because as I mentioned to you before, there were some things that were happening that I subconsciously knew weren't okay, but I think because I couldn't put a name to it, I didn't know, like things like gaslighting. I had no idea what that was called to be able to say, don't do that to me. I knew what you were doing or what he was doing wasn't okay, but I didn't know how to call it out, and I think even to your point, that was the hardest part for me was I didn't realize I was internalizing a lot of things, because it was easier to control. I messed this up. I should have known better. But again, being able to call it and say, no, that wasn't me. That was this.
Yes.
Was very, that was healing in itself. And that was a step in itself.
Yeah, that's good. And I think the person has to be in a place where they're ready to learn about gaslighting, or they have to learn that person that they're enamored with is toxic or doesn't have the best intentions. And people aren't always ready to hear that. Women, and again, if you're, gaslighting, or if you've been under manipulative or coercive control, part of how that works, or I should say mainly how that works, is teaching you that everything that happens is all your fault. You're all the blame for it, or you're crazy. And so a lot of times they're still kind of stuck in that mode, and they want to run things by me to see whether or not they are crazy, for lack of a better word. That I get asked that a lot. Am I crazy? I don't understand. And it's just kind of that game, and that you have to very gingerly, and people don't want to believe that they could be with a malicious person or a narcissist.
Yes. But even to your point, I think a lot of that can be both rooted in family as well. I know for me, I struggle with, I was a young caregiver. And I learned about there's trauma associated with being a young caregiver.
Absolutely.
And so I didn't realize how I was manipulated a lot as a
Yes.
child and even as an adult by people who I wanted to help and who I felt like
Mhm.
needed me. And so I had to, I think to your
Mhm.
point, you don't see it as the good in people and you want to lean
Yes.
on love. How does a person, I would say, and whether it be female or male or whoever, how do you recognize those red flags or those toxic traits if you don't know they're toxic to begin with?
That's a good point, and I think it's especially important in the Black community because a lot of things, like even kind of what you're talking about, are normalized and expected. And I've worked with a lot of Black women. I specifically did research study on Black women who were psychologically abused by their parents while growing up. And one of the themes that kept coming up was I was expected to take care of my siblings as though I were their parent. And a lot of people normalize that. If your mom's a single mom, if you are the oldest child and you're expected to kind of stay home and help, and a lot of that is survival mode. Right. It's, if you grew up without one parent or you grew up with a parent that was stretched very thin, that's survival mode. Survival keeps us from thriving, and that's not very healthy. It's not meant to survive all of your life, not just survive. You do that when it's necessary. But again, just like that soldier, you don't know when to turn that off, turn off that survival, and you don't know you may not know necessarily when survival works as a double-edged sword. Yeah, you can accomplish some stuff, but a lot of good things can be kept out of your life too.
It's almost, I think it's crazy you say that because one thing I've been really struggling with is my independence. I think again, as I'm learning to unpack, like really, like I love I'm a life coach, I'm a teacher, and I have really emphasized reflection so much, right? That sometimes like you have to look behind you to really understand what's ahead of you. And so just for me, like recognizing that because I've been used to instability and people not being dependable and people not being secure, I've learned to lean just on me because I knew that at the end of the day, I wasn't going to let me fall. And so now stepping into a season where people want to help, and I'm meeting people who want to do for me, people don't realize how hard and difficult it is to really let them be there for me.
And Black women, especially, right? I go back to again, Black women, especially. Black women have the superwoman syndrome. No, I'm independent. No, I don't need anything. I think we've been conditioned very early on when we ask for help, that help isn't there, right? Or that help might be thrown back in our face when we're vulnerable, that we needed help at some point. At some point, asking for help became a bad thing. And so we have almost this sort of toxic relationship with independence where we don't need anybody. We don't want to depend on anybody. We want to overachieve and make sure that we're stacked in such a way that we'll never need a man.
Yep.
And when we finally get a man that wants to be helpful, is I don't need you. Well, how does that work out? You know what I mean? Like how, and people want to feel needed. And I think, again, we have to, this is where we go back to the filtering that, it's okay to let that wall down. It's okay to let people in, but we have to be able to practice filtering that we can safely connect with and people who we can safely depend on and that are reliable and that want to care for us. And I also think part of that too with Black women need to know when to engage in self-care. And for a lot of women, Black women especially, self-care seems like a luxury. That they don't want to afford, or they feel like there's just this endless bar of things that they need to accomplish. So when they accomplish something, they don't even recognize it, or they don't even acknowledge it. It's on to the next thing. It is, this bar, it continues to raise. So it's never enough. It's never good enough. It's never, I don't have time to stop and acknowledge myself. And no, I'm not going to, stop and take care of myself. That's a waste of time. I have so much to do until we run ourselves into the ground.
And when you do it, we feel guilty. Like,
yes,
I never forget. I slept in and watched a season of All American, and I was like, the next day, I'm like, why did you do that? How could you spend a Saturday doing nothing? You wasted. It was horrible.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm guilty of it too. I mean, because again, even though I get better about it, when we talk about things that are heavily ingrained, there'll still be a slight struggle sometimes, even when you work on it. But eventually, with time and intentionality, that will fade.
Yes. And so you even talking about intentionality, you mentioned it a couple of times, but this idea of a part of or steps to unlearning involve filtering, I think. And then I know I'm also learning self-advocacy is a big thing as well when it comes to setting boundaries, and like this idea of you teaching people how to treat you. Because I've struggled with it. I professionally, personally, I'm learning how to like let people know like that isn't okay, or hey, I see this and I don't like this. I need you to fix this. We talk about filtering. What does filtering and what does self-advocacy look like, at least in a healthy way?
I think when you filter, you have to, first of all, you have to be in sync with yourself, and you have to know what are things, morals, beliefs, and, standards that you have. Just what, like, what do you value in life as your basic standard? And I think when you have those things and they're very clear to you, people who fall in line with that should be the ones in your tribe. Everybody else is just an acquaintance or an associate, and that means family too.
Wow.
And I think people do it the opposite way. They pick people and then they kind of hope that they'll fit in that box.
Yes.
They try to make it work. And when it doesn't work physically, they'll do mental hula hoops to make it work and put these people in these boxes. And it doesn't work like that. You set the standard. You have the standard for things that you value and beliefs that you believe in. And everyone needs to fall in alignment with that. Now, with that being said, there's no reason why you can't connect with other people, but just with the people that are close to you, that are like really in your circle, they need to be in line with you. So, if you value money, you don't need a man in your life that's a fixer-upper and doesn't have money and is always in your purse.
Right.
He needs to be valuing money too. And you guys need to be having the same conversation. And that's friend or lover. And the other piece of that is, I think, the art of connection in terms of just being able to talk with both men and women, and being able to have different levels of relationships with them and being okay with that. Every man that you meet in your life should not be with the intention of having sex.
Right.
I can't have sex with him, or it should not be with the intention of marrying him. But you'll be amazed at how many women are like, oh, I'm only interested in marriage right now, so I'm going to throw that man away because I'm not interested in marrying him. And so there is, you can have friendships with people, you can have mentors of people, you can have work relationships with people, you can have people that you go out for drinks with every other Friday, and y'all just laugh and have a good time and gossip about. Yeah, just friends, or even acquaintances, and that's okay. Everyone doesn't deserve to have the same access to you, but just because they don't fit in a certain box doesn't mean that they always need to be discarded either. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
I love that. And so
Yeah.
I think I heard someone say once about how you don't want to build walls, but you should have a fence, right? Something that controls who you let in. And so I guess my last question is like, that's all great for when you're seeking and you're looking into new relationships. But what happens, I know even for me, that separation of what if you're already in relationship with people that you're learning and that you're seeing are not good for you. I know I made the mistake of I intertwined my life so much with people that when I was ready to go, it couldn't be a clean break. There had to be some, to your point, a safety plan and strategy in place to really disconnect from that person.
Yeah.
So what does that look like, or what recommendations, suggestions would you give to somebody who wants to separate?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's like the second time I've been asked this today because somebody put this up on my Instagram stories and I responded to it actually right before this show. And I think people put a lot of hype on how you make someone else feel. And I think the thing is that to remember people are responsible for how they feel independently of you. You are not someone's world and vice versa. And so, if there's not a safety concerns, but you've just kind of been in this relationship with someone that's just not fulfilling, that just doesn't work for you, I think it's best to just tell them straight away, I'm not in this space to be emotionally available for this relationship anymore. I'm done with it. Just be very clear, be out in the open. You can have a conversation about it, but I really wouldn't do too much hand holding or too much, worrying about what that person, just tell them and, go on with your life. Now, if it's a situation where you've got a stage 5 clinger, you've got some people that are dangerous, it's going to look a little bit different. And so everyone's going to be, everyone's going to react differently. What I will say when it comes to people that are dangerous, controlling, or manipulative, or just are not ready to let you go, what I will say is a lot of the work that I do is boundary work around withdrawing. Withdrawing sexually, withdrawing emotionally, withdrawing financially, and making sure that you're clear and consistent with that message if and whenever possible. What I found is that, a lot of women, what they'll do is they'll be inconsistent. They'll say, I don't want this person anymore, but then they might have sex again. Or then they will continue to go out on dates, or, they'll continue to engage, so it's like this back and forth. Continuously withdraw from that when you can, like I said, when it's, and there's a lot of boundary work and just being clear in your communication, and saying, I need my space, and continue to take space away from that relationship. Take a safety plan to exit if you need to. With, again, a stage 5 clinger, I think it's good to be very short, very succinct, and just straight to the point. This isn't going to work. You may need to take extra steps, blocking phone calls, blocking emails, those kind of things.
Wow. And it's just so many flashbacks are happening right now because, again, not having the words to put to my experiences, but having them so as someone who was in a domestic violence relationship, having to do that withdrawal and saving my money. One day he came home and his stuff was all packed up. I had friends at home. I had my safety plan. I had friends in the house, so he couldn't come in. It's just, I didn't have those words. I was, 20 years old. I didn't have the words for that. But.
And not allowing them to have access to your plan. There's so many women or people that I work with, because I work with men too, that I don't know. I think there's a combination of people that expect like this last minute change or miraculous, like, you know, change that they'll say, I'm leaving. Don't do that
Just
with the
go.
dangerous. Just go. Just go. Make a safety plan and just go. Don't expect this person to suddenly stop hitting you, to suddenly stop being manipulative because you're going to leave. Don't expect that person to, suddenly romance you or wine and dine you because you're going to leave. It's never a good thing. And then, you know, why would you want to stay on the roller coaster?
Absolutely. It's I know we can talk this for hours, and I'm always mindful of everyone's time. I think,
Hell
but
yeah.
to your point, we talk about relationships. At the root of it, it's really about, even to your last statement about, we have to get to a place where, you know, you have to value. It's like really about self-worth and value. The more you learn to value
Mm-hmm.
and appreciate and to see yourself and your worth,
Mm-hmm.
the less you tolerate and the less you put yourself in harmful situations.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was something that I know I had to, like, even like I still fill my cup with, and my intake is all about self affirmation of really building
Yes.
up that worth so that I don't put myself in the same situations that I've put myself in repeatedly in the past. And so
Mhm.
so first and foremost, Dr. Jones, thank you
Yeah.
so much. I can't wait for this to air because I'm going to be dropping all of my favorite posts and my favorite things. I'm going to be shouting your name from the rooftops because I am a fan. And
Oh,
so it
thank
means
you.
so much to have you here.
Oh,
I always let the guests just give one, if they remember nothing else about today's conversation about you, just in your experience, what's one thing you feel like you want to tell listeners just after this conversation?
you know, life is a journey. You know, everyone's journey is very, very different. You know, I know we're in the age of social media and comparison and just trying to be like the next person. But, you know, it's important to remember that when you're healing, your life is your life and it should be individual and unique to you. And so at the end of the day, the only person that you ever need to explain anything to or justify anything to or rationalize anything with is yourself. No one else needs to have an answer. No one else needs to feel like they deserve an answer but you know. And so I think that's important because a lot of relationship work is how can I be better for other people? And it really needs to be how can I be the best version of myself for me?
Oh my gosh, wasn't that a great episode? Oh, Dr. Natalie and I we could have talked all day. Okay, low key, I was trying to slide in some free service. I'm joking, but again, you know, we always say once a part of the family, always a part of the family. So looking forward to having Dr. Natalie back. But I am hoping that just as you were listening to me share a little bit about my family dynamic and some of the childhood trauma that I have overcome or that I'm still working through. I hope that it just in that time you had your own moments to reflect on your own family dynamic. And as we're talking about and looking at how we want to realign, right, to reassess and to restructure our relationships, you know, I got to give you some homework. And so the first thing that I want you to kind of, if you have a chance to just take a few moments away and to sit with yourself for like 20 minutes. But to ask yourself, you know, number one, how have your family dynamics influenced how you see yourself, right? If I were to ask your family to describe you, what would they say, right? How has your family or your family dynamic influenced how you see yourself? I think taking it a step further, I want you to then ask yourself how your family and your family dynamics has influenced how you see others, and how you treat others, right? You know, what behaviors were you taught, right? You know, how are you taught to manage conflict? How are you taught to show love? How are you taught to show appreciation? How are you taught to, or how are you taught to communicate, right? Whether that be indirectly or directly, right? How have your family dynamics influenced how you see and treat people? You know, which I think in turn leads me to my last question, which is, what are those inherited, right? Those learned behaviors that have to be adjusted to increase the quality of your relationships, right? I think it's so important. And just like with a physical illness, like you have to first diagnose it first, right? You can't have a surgeon cutting you open until you know what it is, right? And so those first two questions are really about you kind of finding the root to some of the issues. My pastor, Dr. Darius Daniels, always says that sometimes people focus on the fruit rather than the root, right? And that sometimes the issue or the problem you're trying to solve isn't the real problem, right? Or the issue that's taking the most of your attention is, right? So how do you get to the root? So when you're thinking about your relationships and where you want to see them, right? What are some of the root issues? What are the things that are constantly popping up, right? And then like really assessing where they come from. How did I learn, like why am I wired the way that I'm wired, right? How do I see these things? And I think it's then once you acknowledge and you pinpoint those areas of improvement and areas where you want to be more intentional, then can you work to be more intentional, right? And so my last question is, what do you notice? What are some common trends? What are some things that you need to unlearn? And be mindful of as we kind of continue throughout this series. And so that's all I want to give you right now. Again, we're going to dive deeper and deeper into this as we go and move throughout the series. But just as you're answering those questions again, I tell you, just take like 15, 20 minutes a day just to sit with yourself and to sit with God and just to really reflect, right? But take that time and I guess I'm curious to know, what do you discover? What do you come up with? And so if you're not already, make sure you follow me on IG at _ the Cool Auntie. Auntie spelled with the IE, _ the Cool Auntie. Make sure you follow me and DM me or comment and let me know just how the questions are working, but also what you learn about yourself, because I want you to really lean into this series and really reassess and realign and restructure your relationship so you can have a better quality of life. All right? And so love you much as always, and don't forget, call me back.